Hello, and a very warm welcome to this session, Enabling Resilience Through Women's Economic Empowerment. Thank you all for joining us on the final day of the Women's Forum Global Meeting 2020. My name is Yasmin Poole, and I'm part of the editorial team at the Women's Forum. In a moment, I will hand you over to the moderator, Imran Dasu. Imran will be leading this session, which explores the opportunities for building economic and societal resilience through women's economic empowerment in business and supply chains. To follow and engage with the session on social media, please use the hashtags #WomenForBusiness, #WFGM20, and #WomenForInclusion. Feel free to share your questions in the chat throughout the session. I will now be inviting Imran Dasu and Jamila Belabidi, who will be setting the scene for us today. Imran is a partner at Carney. As head of the UK operations practice, he works with clients to help shape and drive change, including creating greater diversity in supply chains. Over the past 2 years, Carney have been the knowledge partner to the Women for Business Daring Circle. Jamila is the Global Supplier Diversity and Women's Economic Empowerment Leader at Procter & Gamble. She helps design and shape these programs for P&G, but also for the industry, especially over the last 2 years through their leadership role in the Women for Business Daring Circle. Welcome, Imran and Jamila, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Yasmin, and hello everyone, and thanks very much for joining the session. Over the next 45 minutes, Jamila and I will set the scene on the general issue around women entrepreneurs and why it matters, the role of large corporations to help close the gap, and how the Daring Circle within the Women's Forum is here to help. We'll then broaden the discussion and explore a number of related themes with our esteemed panel. A wide body of research has highlighted to us all that women-owned, women-empowered, and women-led organizations are hugely underrepresented in corporate supply chains. They face multiple challenges, and in becoming suppliers and on the demand side, procurement departments often face structural and institutional barriers to accessing and incorporating women-led organizations into their supply chains. So Jamila, P&G is a $70 billion company, diverse global workforce of over 100,000, and in pretty much every market and every segment you compete in, you're pretty much number one, number two. So why is advancing women's entrepreneurship important to you, important to P&G, and what steps have you been taking?
Sure. Hi, Imran. Hi, everyone. Well, first of all, let's start with celebrating every entrepreneur around the world. You might not know, but this is Global Entrepreneurship Week this week. So we celebrate you every day, but especially this week. So back to your question, Imran. Supporting entrepreneurship is, in general, is good business because it helps create value, it helps create jobs, it strengthens communities and ultimately economies. And this is even more true for SMEs, which, by the way, includes the most women entrepreneurs. However, historically, gender inequality has been a sad reality in multi-aspects for women entrepreneurs, be it access to finance, access to contracts, access to networks, supporting system technology, you name it. And a shocking figure represents this inequality pretty well. Only 1% of the total spend from large corporations and governments are actually allocated to women-owned, women-led businesses, despite the fact that they still represent a third of the total SMEs. So this sheds light on a huge untapped opportunity for all, which is to have them participate more in large corporation and in government supply chains, making these then more inclusive. Back in 2015 at P&G, we've extended one of our US-based program called Supplier Diversity, which is in fact a proactive and inclusive sourcing program for all underrepresented groups over there, which are women, LGBT, veterans, ethnic minorities, disabled-owned companies. And the objective is to offer them equal opportunities to participate in bids from public and private sector. From our 40+ years experience over there, we do know that not only this program is a force for good because it helps those entrepreneurs and the communities they live in, but this is also a force for growth for us corporations, because very often those entrepreneurs stimulate innovation. They connect dots differently, right? They also are helping us better understand and offer better solution to our diverse consumers. And very often actually, they are very nimble and cost efficient. They can also bring an aspect of supply chain resilience, which we know is very cherished in current context. This is not even to mention, you know, the importance for our consumers, for the Generation Z, who are expecting large corporations to take a stand and help build a more inclusive world. So here we go. Our aim is to reapply this very simple concept in Europe, but through the lens of the region, right? Through the lens of the European legal framework, dynamics, culture, etc. And while inclusion is about every human and about every diversity, due to obvious resource constraints, our program starts with a gender lens focus. Because still today, women represent 50% of the population, and our belief is that if we equally empower women, then they will become a very strong ally to help us design and shape a very inclusive world where all diversities can thrive. So wherever possible, we will look at intersectionalities, but we will learn with women entrepreneurs and will expand further to other underrepresented groups. Now, you've asked about the key steps we've undertaken in P&G. Let me share 4, which I will also think of these as tips for any company who wants to get started. Number 1, sponsorship. If you do not have the right level of sponsorship from your company, it will be a challenge. Supply diversity or inclusive sourcing is often considered as a conflicting program with supply chain rationalization and others. Actually, it's not. It is complementary, but you do need to have this very strong voice to enable you push for the program. The second, I would say, advice is make sure that you drive the engagement and the right level of education within the organization, and that's an interesting one. People will agree about the rationale to drive D&I inside a company's wall, but it's not straightforward to drive the same externally. So you need to intentionally spend time and care to educate the internal world on why this is a business case and why it matters. A third tip will be around this very much underestimated lever, which is the supply chain from large corporations and even like sizable companies. Think of P&G, we every year we partner with 60,000 suppliers. Imagine a second if we were to inspire, engage, and bring along with us even a small portion of them. Imagine the ripple effect, the exponential impact, and if everybody does the same, imagine the change we can bring into this world. And finally, very last tip, please do not reinvent the wheel, do not start from scratch. When we started back in 2015, we partnered with WeConnect International. And with that, we have been exposed to many like-minded companies from whom we learned a lot about cyber supply diversity outside the US. And obviously, we're learning from each other, exchanging best practices. And that is the way it should be. So please do not try to reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of companies who are here to help you.
Jamila, thank you. In your answer, you used the word opportunity multiple times. I think I kind of lost count, but you also talked about business case, and it's very clear that in P&G this has really landed, and you see it as an opportunity. Then I would kind of pose the question: given the amount of investment, energy, the mobilization, the whole organization mobilization that you're referring to, why not go it alone? Why not see this as a source of competitive advantage for P&G? Because you talked about your customers and your consumers and their expectations. Why not go it alone? Why team? Why partner? Why collaborate with competitors as well?
Okay. Well, this is a huge effort, right? It is about changing a lot of dynamics in a fast efficient way and at a European scale, right? So no one company can do that alone. And this is where SDG 17 plays a very important role. This is an area where there is no space for competition, and actually there is rather a lot of space for opportunities and collaboration. And we believe that the Women's Forum is actually an ideal convening platform to host such a program. And specifically, the Daring Circle is a very promising coalition to actively tackle and advance this topic with the private sector engagement, but also with the public sector and the institution support. And the mission of the Daring Circle is very, very simple. It's about creating the foundation and the infrastructure in Europe to leave no excuse to any company not to engage in an inclusive sourcing journey or a program. So to do so with the Daring Circle, we actually surrounded ourselves with multiple experts. So we heard We Connect, which are actually now bringing on a platform where you can meet, where any corporate buyer can meet with women-owned companies and exchange about capabilities and about contract opportunities. We have with us UN Women, who in my view offers a universal scorecard with the WEPs, with the Women Empowerment Principles. It's a fantastic blueprint for any company who wants to get started with the gender equality program. We have Clifford Chance, who have been of a massive help helping us navigate through the EU legal framework, which is not easy. And we have you, Imran, with Kearney, right? And your procurement expertise. You've helped put all our knowledge together and build this fantastic diagnostic tool that I know for sure will be of a massive help to any company. And last but not least, we have the Women Forum voice. We are trying through their voice to help influence supporting policies, to run surveys to understand the progress of supply diversity in Europe, and most importantly, provide help and training materials for any company who wants to get started. So I will pause here now, Imran, and I would like to turn to you and ask one question. A few seconds ago, I talked about this diagnostic tool that Kearney has helped shape and developed. Can you please talk to us a little bit more about it, please?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Jamila. And many of you will know, how conversations go, in the executive suites of large organizations. And as soon as the kind of opportunity that you also described earlier, Jamila, lands and people kind of get it, they kind of see the opportunity, they very quickly want to understand, well, where are we today? What is an objective view of where we are today? And secondly, where is everyone else? Where are our peers? Where are our competitors in this journey? And finally, what can we do very tangibly and very practically to actually progress, to actually advance our organizations? So with you, with the Daring Circle and with others, we've developed this tool that allows organizations to do exactly those three things, right? It allows them to answer a few questions, quickly determine very objectively where they are in the sourcing journey. And as you know, Jamila, we had to unpick this, right, to really frame and define, because what does it mean, right? So we've defined that with you and with the rest of our partners, so we can quickly and objectively define kind of what that looks like, and then very practically explain to the organizations what they can do, because that's the kind of immediate next question. How do we get from stage 1 to stage 2, or from 2 to 3? And so we help understand that current sense of maturity, but also drive that action orientation, right? And some of the steps that you described earlier as well. And now the tool is available and it's open now and it's open to everybody. We will put in the chat, or we'll put in one of the notice boards a link to the survey tool and to the inclusive sourcing journey. So if your organization is interested in getting a baseline of where you are today, please click through, and that's available to everybody. Excellent. Jamila, thank you. I'm going to now move on, and we'll now move on. We now have the opportunity to actually broaden the discussion and explore some of the critical themes, and also some of the themes you brought up around WEPs and about the legal constraints with our panel. And to do that, we're joined by Anna Falth from the UN, we're joined by Virginia Tan, and by Tiernan Brady. And I'll quickly introduce each of our panelists. Anna is head of the Secretariat of the Women's Empowerment Principles, the WEPs, as Jamila explained earlier, which is an initiative of the UN Anna provides policy advice. She promotes collaboration, learning and innovation to specifically advance women's economic empowerment. Virginia is joining us. She's from Tasia Ventures. She's a founder there. She's also the founder of She Loves Tech, the world's largest startup competition for women. The VC fund is actually the largest female-oriented gender lens VC in Asia. And she's also founded Lean in China, which supports a platform with over 100,000 members across China. Tiernan joins us from Clifford Chance. Tiernan is the Global Director of Inclusion, so very well able to speak to this topic. And Tiernan, thanks for joining us. He's responsible for developing and implementing their global inclusion policies and campaigns within the firm. And Tiernan had to step in at the last minute, so really appreciate you joining us today. So thank you to all our panelists. Just to set the context, the WEPs are a set of principles offering guidance to businesses, and there's huge take-up. I think there's something like over 4,000 signatories to the principles. So question to you, Anna, in the context of those principles, what does signing up actually mean? What does it symbolize? And how have you seen signing up to the principles actually catalyze, actually accelerate organizational mobilization towards making real change?
Thank you very much, Imran, for that question, and thank you very much to the Women's Forum for organizing this very pertinent discussion, and thanks also, Jamila, to have brought into the women's empowerment principles already into the discussion. So for those that are not familiar with the principle, there are 7 principles that basically create a global framework, a global platform to launch activities for women's empowerment and gender equality more broadly. For some companies, it's really seen as the North Star, as that kind of framework. We hear from many of our signatories, and you're right, we have more than 4,000 signatories and representing millions of employees and stakeholders. And becoming a signatory is really kind of, we need the CEO to make that commitment. And we hear from companies that when you have that highest leadership involved, things happen. So we require the CEO to sign up. And then we also encourage them to speak about it in public, which also helps really to kind of firm that commitment. And then many of the companies start internally because they think that we need to clean our own house before we go and speak with our business partners. So we've seen a lot of progress in companies, and we actually started to make some comparisons between those that have signed the WEPs and those that haven't. And we've seen that there are more women in leadership in those companies that have joined us on this journey. The principles, they span from workplace issues to marketplace, as we've heard from Jamila also talking about the supply chain, but also to engaging with women in local communities. And we need action everywhere. We need to have, but we don't ask our signatories to do everything at once. We start with small steps, as we also heard from Jamila talking about earlier. And we can see that some of our signatories that are investors, they ask the investees to also sign the WEPs. That's very important because we then start creating an ecosystem of committed companies that really lead with gender equality and women's empowerment. We've seen as companies like P&G that are starting to ask their suppliers to also be gender responsive, but also to bring in the women businesses into the supply chain, whether it's in the first or second tier of suppliers. This is very important that we have that kind of solidarity in the business community, that we bring in the partners, whether they are women-owned, gender-responsive companies, other WEP signatories, or they are minority businesses. It's very important that we have that diversity and inclusion in the way that we are engaging with businesses. And we see real change when there is a real commitment. And we have on our website actually a number of different case studies where our signatories are telling their stories on the steps that they have taken. It's not to say that big change will happen right away. It is a lot of work to be done around social norms. It's about stereotypes, overcoming those stereotypes. And we heard earlier from Jamila talking about education is key. We need to bring everyone on board on what matters. And the only way that change can happen if it's really embedded in the corporate culture. If it's seen as something that you can do on the side, you can do this year, we can focus on response to COVID. Next year, we focus on Black Lives Matters, and then we can focus on women empowerment. It's not seen as that kind of siloed agenda. It is an agenda and a cultural shift towards inclusion, diversity, and fairness in the workplace and the marketplace.
So thank you for that, Anna. And you know, you've talked about value creation and those case studies on the website, and I'm sure the listeners will want to go and check those as well. And Jamila, you create a very clear sense that this is not just the right thing to do, but actually represents a business opportunity. So I'm going to turn to Virginia. And Virginia, you know, data points, as I mentioned earlier, still point to persistent disparities. Only a fraction of the funding available and the deal flow, the overall volume invested, actually ends up with women-led organizations. So why is that? Is that, you know, are investors truly aware of the benefits of channeling funds into women-led businesses? And if they are you seeing a step change in those deal flows, certainly in Asia, but also in other regions? And I know you're very much focused in the tech space. Do you see that in tech? Do you see that in other segments? What's your view?
Thank you, Imran. You know, absolutely delighted to be here. So what do I see? If I was going to be honest, as I started from scratch, building this fund as a first-time fund manager, I actually used to be a lawyer and a banker. I was at Clifford Chance, actually. And I think, you know, the big elephant in the room when I first started meeting investors was that I think a lot of investors, actually felt that gender was a limitation and not an opportunity. And I think that was one of the biggest motivations actually for me to build She Loves Tech and to build, into the largest tech startup competition for women in the world, and motivation for actually building Teja, because I really wanted to prove, or show that sort of investment case. The good news is that I think in the last 5 years, and especially the last 2 years, we definitely see the gender lens investing space really grow. So I think something like 200 to 300 funds, I think, were just set up over the course of the last 2-3 years. And I think 90% of the funds which are women-led are actually classed as emerging managers, which means that they basically emerged in the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years. So I think I think there's good news on that. In terms of progress and in terms of the benefits, I think what I actually noticed, and I want to speak very specifically for Asia because that's where I'm based. I felt that the diversity argument didn't work so well in Asia. I could throw out as much diversity data as I wanted. Having this amount of women in senior leadership, were gifted this amount of returns. I had all the data, but I realized actually, the investors actually weren't that interested in that diversity data. So I stopped actually using it. What they were actually just truly interested in was actually what I was investing in and what was the actual opportunity set. And so, I really focused, on that. My own opportunity set for Teja Ventures is what I call technology for the she economy. The she economy is an $18 trillion global market. In Asia, an $8 trillion market. And I'm sure Jamila can attest to this because I think, I think P&G knows that market very, very well. Women control 80% of global discretionary spending. And so what I realized is that I had much better luck when I focused less on the women-led and actually focused as women as a demographic and the female economy as an opportunity. And I think investors, male and female, actually, have really started, to actually catch on to that. And the one thing I did want to say was that post-COVID, COVID has actually changed the game for us. I think at the beginning of my journey, when I first started raising the fund, this was back in 2018, it was seen as very, very niche. Gender lens investing seen as very, very niche. And a subset of impact investing. But I think post, I would say from I think right after the worst part of the pandemic, I think in Asia, which was in, I think, Q2 this year, ever since then, I've seen investors being so much more open to actually considering this opportunity set, simply because I think COVID has shown us that the way we were operating before actually did not necessarily work, and the gaps, and people are more open to considering new types of opportunities and underserved verticals, etc. And so I think this is actually an opportunity for change for us.
Thank you, Virginia. Just to follow up on that, because you talked about the role of technology, and some of us who heard the session yesterday will be aware of there was a session with a debate, actually a very interesting debate, with the premise, will technology save the world? And I was expecting quite a skewed result, but in the end it was very balanced. The votes were 512 for and only 507 against, which I was very surprised by, that it was so close. What is the role of technology for gender lens investing, or the opportunities that you feel are present within the she economy?
Absolutely. One of my main investment thesis actually is that is women as economic drivers versus just being social beneficiaries. And women, we've seen are very often first adopters of new consumption behaviors, and conduits to new markets. And digitalization and technology have actually allowed them to scale and monetize those behaviors even more so. And I think because I've been based in in China and also in the rest of Asia the last 7 years. What essentially I've seen, when for example, you look at a lot of the new unicorns, I think women as a demographic, and when I say demographic, I mean women as consumers, as online traffic, and as a mobile workforce, are actually driving revenue, and growth in companies, regardless of whether these companies are female orientated or not, especially in sort of the internet, the internet, the mobile, and the social media sectors, and essentially, I think what we're actually seeing is that women are actually huge drivers of new business models in the internet economy. And so, maybe I'll give one or two examples to sort of flesh that out for people. From what I'm seeing, for example, when we look at last mile distribution, when we're looking at financial inclusion models, what we're seeing is that, women's savings groups, which have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, but now you add fintech to it, you digitalize it, you add e-commerce element to it. And, we've seen companies like that, become unicorns, get acquired, etc. I invested in a company which essentially is India's largest social network for women. And, essentially, now it's become a form of digital identity. It's almost like a Facebook for women. And they monetize a lot through remote work, onboarding women as remote workers and also as agents for social commerce, etc. I think, when I really think of women, what is the real opportunity of the she economy? I think of women as a demographic, right? What is an opportunity as consumers, as online traffic, and as a mobile workforce? And this is actually what I see. I've already mentioned that women actually control 80% of global discretionary spending because they purchase on behalf of themselves and their households. Now, where does technology come in? When you think of online traffic, women are actually more likely than men to buy online. They're also more likely, they spend more time on social networks, 30%, and they're actually more likely to buy from their friends. And also, through the communities. And this, to me, is the future of retail. And the future of retail, as we know, is definitely not offline or physical. And I think, the pandemic has actually shown us this. So the pandemic actually, in many ways, confirmed that thesis and has only accelerated it. And the third point about women being a remote, a mobile workforce is that I think the pandemic has also accelerated the move to sort of remote work. And essentially, digitalization, especially in certain parts of Asia, has unlocked women as agents of labor, and help them monetize those behaviors, and actually is driving the rise of a lot of mobile applications. For example, telemedicine, ed tech, healthcare and education being two big examples apart from commerce. Women being both the buyers and the sellers, or both the suppliers as well as the consumers. So, this for me is, I think technology has very, very clearly shown us, that opportunity, and only accelerated by COVID.
Okay. Thank you, Virginia. Well, it's such a large opportunity. I have to go there with my next question to you, which is, well, does it then matter that funds are still largely controlled by male-dominated entities, male-led, organizations? Is that a constraint? Is that really choking off the kind of acceleration opportunity that you're describing?
So, in all the years that I've done work, related to gender, I've never believed that the world is, male versus female, just like the way I don't believe that funding is, or the funding gap for women is just because of sheer discrimination based on gender. What I've actually noticed, for example, so first of all, I think, increasingly, I think men are actually waking up to the opportunities of the she economy, because they understand that, that these are underserved verticals. The problem, I think, when you have any fund or any industry dominated by, I think it's whether it's men, women, or it's a specific type of a person, is that leads to the entrenchment of certain types of behavior. And in this case, that is problematic. And so let me give you an example of certain types of behavior. I think as human beings, we invest in what we know. So I think, for a long time, there were many verticals where, for example, the mother baby sector, the childcare sector has been chronically underfunded. For example, certain parts of healthcare, and actually in particular women's health, have also been chronically underfunded. That has actually changed, a lot. I would say even in the last year or so. I think people are actually really picking up. Men and women are actually really picking up on those opportunities. But I think, where I see an issue where, in terms of, the finance industry being largely controlled by male-dominated entities, is I think in the way we view opportunity, not just in terms of the verticals in which we choose to fund, but the types of behavior that we want to reward. And I think to me, that's really the key. So for example, let's say venture capital was an entire industry built around risk-taking. It's high risk and high return behavior. And for example, as a venture capitalist, what we are taught as conventional wisdom is that one company will return our whole fund. For example, so essentially everything else will die, and one company will basically make 100 times and return, a whole fund. But what I've learned, when I look at women-led businesses, for example, I invest in both men and women-led businesses. We focus on the she economy as an opportunity. But when I look at women-led businesses, it's not a boom or bust. Very often, instead of like high risk and growth at all costs, is actually a huge focus on revenue, huge focus on sustainability. That also means that maybe you're not growing 100 times in a year, but it means that you're going to have a company. And actually, what the pandemic has actually shown me is that I think some of this venture capital, entrenched behaviors will change, because I think now people are asking more and more, what's your revenue? Are these business models sustainable? I think venture capitalists, apart from the very large ones, are less willing to, just throw money to a growth model. And so I think the world is starting to change, and I think, the key is actually if funds are actually more diverse, then will we actually reward and fund, different types of behavior? And I think the key is that women build businesses in a different way from men. But if we're only rewarding one way as success, right? Okay. And not the other, then women are always going to remain chronically unfunded. So that is my issue. It's about examining the behavior that we think is the gold standard. The one dilemma that I always have as a venture capitalist is this: do we try to change women, or do we try to change the game?
What a nice way to end. I think those biases that you speak of are very interesting, and conscious and unconscious biases, and it's interesting how you're addressing some of those challenges. In a more traditional supply chain context, many chief procurement officers often worry about the structural issues regarding regulatory conditions, and can they award business to certain segments, other segments, and that often constrains behavior, quite frankly, and it constrains progress. So I'm going to pose to you, Tien, and with regard to the legal and regulatory frameworks in a more kind of classical context of supply and demand in organizations, they can represent both an opportunity and a challenge, I feel, and I often hear, and I talk about paralysis, but as I said, there's also an opportunity here. But can you talk to us a little bit about some of the key themes that you see, and around inclusivity and what can be done, what can't be done, and also how that varies by region?
Well, thanks, Imran. I think you're right. Sadly, the answer is it's complicated. I wish it was an easier answer than that, and because, of course, across the world, every region is forming its own set of rules. Some of them are regulations that are trying to break down barriers. Some of them are trying to make sure we can have a level playing field. But let's be honest, some places are quite happy to pass rules that are doing the opposite as well. And we have to work out, well, how do we get around those at the same time? So part of the initial problem is there's multiple layers of regulation, all based on different cultures, different cultural backdrops. And then there's the added problem of occasionally we have legislation that has good intention, but actually does the exact opposite. It creates a terrible barrier, which it didn't plan to do. So, I mean, my granny always used to say the road to hell is paved with good intention, and we have to, we have to be aware of that as we look at regulations that aim to make the world a better place, but actually can end up complicating it, clogging it, and creating more barriers. And I think probably if I was thinking about 2 or particularly 3 things that really, hit home at the minute on that, one of them obviously would be data and privacy. Obviously, if we want to, advance inclusion, it is always more beneficial if we have access to data to see how are we doing. I mean, without knowing whether we're doing well in the market, whether we're doing retention, promotion, recruitment, then we're kind of flying blind in terms of strategy formation and how we engage with clients and suppliers. So as we travel around the world, that data legislation is very complicated. And in some countries, we'll be able to ask multiple questions across multiple dimensions of population. So going back to one of the earlier points, I mean, there is an intersectionality sometimes around these barriers, actually probably more than sometimes. But in some countries, we may only have access to gender data. So we don't know whether actually does your ethnicity overlap into that, and how is that impacting outcomes. So trying to gauge where the legal framework is about what we can ask and what we can gather is tricky. Now, in some places, it's more open, and that's great, and that allows us to design good strategies. But in other places, it's going to create some barriers that we really have to think about. Well, how do we develop good strategies when we don't have full information because of the regulations that are there? The other one that I would highlight as well is, sometimes we can aim to try and solve a problem and end up creating a layer of complication and regulation that prevents us solving the problem. If we're thinking about smaller businesses, for example, and minority-run businesses, or in the case of women, majority-run businesses when it comes to the population, if we've over-regulated that in different countries, then actually we're just closing the door on some people being able to enter the procurement process. All that's left is a procurement process that was regulated with the intention of creating greater equality, but that has left itself in a position where only the biggest firms are able to engage. And that, of course, obviously has the opposite effect of what it intended. So I think there's quite a bit around regulation that unfortunately means we have to think very carefully, because each region will give us a different answer. And the one thing I would always say, though, is the one thing big firms can do instantly is pay faster, because most firms, when it comes to being minority run, they're probably a bit smaller and they need the cash flow quicker. So, don't hang around with it sitting in your bank account. If you want to really help diverse firms, write the check when it's due.
That's a great tip. And just a quick follow up, and we are running out of time, of course. But a quick follow up on that. I know you also, Tiernan, would turn the lens to Clifford Chance in your own ecosystem. What are the kinds of things that you've been able to do within your supplier base, with your business partners, clients, and with regulators and policymakers?
Well, I think what we've done is made sure collaboration is at the heart of it. When we work with clients, when we work with suppliers, not making it a race. Or put it this way, I remember when I was a teenager, there used to be a T-shirt. I don't know if people remember Garfield. It was a little fat cat. And the little fat cat was standing beside this very big fat dog. And the name of the T-shirt was, if you want to look thin, stand beside someone fatter than you. And the danger is with inclusion, the easiest way to look good sometimes is to point your finger at someone else and say they're bad. And you get to look really moral and you get to look fantastic. The most important thing I would say, and I'm conscious of your time, is when we're dealing with suppliers, when you're dealing with clients, it's a collaboration. It's not a race, and it's not a I'm better than you competition, because that's not going to create the cultural shift where people start to really see the benefits flow of this. It just becomes a zero-sum game, which inclusion isn't.
That's great. Thank you, Tiernan, for that one. We are running short, but I will end in picking up, Tiernan, from your suggestion about paying faster. I would ask actually the entire panel, given, I mean, we've all read how the COVID crisis has disproportionately affected women, right? In all its kind of in all the forms that we can imagine. What's your one surefire tip for organizations to deploy, something they should consider as a kind of build back better in relation to gender diversity, to not waste this crisis? What could they do differently? What's your one surefire tip? If we could quickly go, maybe Anna first to you, and then to Virginia and Tiernan.
Thank you, Imran. Yeah, I think it's difficult to point at one single action that needs to be done, because there's a lot of things that need to happen. But if I can zoom in on maybe one action, and one action maybe from an organizational perspective, I would recommend, of course, all companies to sign on to our women's empowerment principles. We have specific guidance on how to address these issues from both the workplace and marketplace and community aspect on our website. But I would also like for each of us to think about ourselves as people, and how we actually consciously think about our co-workers, our business partners, and give them a little bit of flexibility during this time. And I think that is something that we will gain going forward in the long term, to really see around us mothers, fathers that might have struggling with taking care of the children at the same time as they're trying to work, and find solutions that can actually work for the company in flexible working arrangements. But also to kind of, when last time did we consciously think about, as a consumer, going and buying from a women entrepreneur? So, and women entrepreneur can become your business partners, they can be your consumers, they can be your allies. So there is consciousness is my one recommendation, to really lead with empathy and solidarity to those people that might be more challenged during this time. And I think that would also help building that inclusive and diverse culture going forward. Thank you.
That's a great tip. Thank you, Anna. Virginia? You're on mute.
Yes. I think in my case, it's, to practice what I preach, and that is to always be, I'm constantly examining my own, subconscious bias, despite, being, building up the gender lens, investing movement, working with, hundreds. I mean, this year we had 3,000 female entrepreneurs apply for She Loves Tech, in a couple of months. I think, when I'm, for example, examining, a new investment opportunity, from a woman or from a man, I'm always, trying to sort of subconsciously reflect, am I treating them differently? Why would I put 100K here and only 50K there, when actually the attraction is kind of like similar? Is that because one is less risk or one is more risk? Why? And I think it's about constantly questioning, the way we judge people, and especially when we judge on gender. And because I think, like I said, even though this is at the forefront of my work, I also acknowledge that I could, have subconscious biases. So, for example, I ask myself, why am I valuing growth, versus revenue, and can we justify that as an investment committee, et cetera, things like that. And I think that a healthy dose of that, I think will go a long way.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. And Tiernan.
Thanks, Imran. I think we've had a peak, but it was only a peak at what could be possible in terms of flexible working. And we had that peak at the same time as we were trying to take care of people during a huge pandemic. I think the biggest thing I think we can do as firms is start working now on embedding the actual frameworks that have to be in place when we go back to work. Because otherwise what's going to happen is human nature is going to kick in, and we're going to slip back to all the old bad ways as quick as we ever did. It's just nature. We think it'll all get back to normal. And we've learned a few bad habits don't have to happen over the past couple of months. But it's learning that and then making sure you build policies and procedures that embed that principle are two very separate conversations. And if we just roll back with some nice comments from leadership level going, well, we're all going to have greater flexible working, we know what will happen. We'll have managers underneath them going, yeah, that applies everywhere else. It doesn't apply in this team. So yeah, yes, it's partially correct for the firm. So we need to actually embed those new policies, new infrastructures. The new behavior won't happen by itself. We have to build the infrastructure to support that now. Don't presume that this new normal will be new at all. We'll get back to the old way far too quickly unless we're very deliberate about it.
Fantastic, Tiernan, thank you. And thank you all. And what a great discussion. We are going to actually put the link, Yasmin, I believe, on the site so everyone can access the inclusive sourcing journey. But really insightful comments there at the end around the WEP's principles and being kind and respectful to each other, challenging ourselves consistently, and trying to codify some of the new ways of working that we've all demonstrated are possible actually into policy to make sure they stick. So great insights and great answers. Thank you throughout the session. Appreciate your time, panel. Thank you, Jamila. And Yasmin, over to you.
Thanks, Imran, and thanks to all the speakers today. Thanks everyone for listening, and I now invite you to return to the main page and enjoy the rest of the sessions we have left in store for us today.